All right, and I think we will go ahead and get started. My name's Kristen Soper. I am the Outreach and Events Coordinator at Lawrence Public Library. I'm a white woman with short dark hair and glasses, and I'm wearing a purple cardigan, and I'm in front of a bright blue wall. And I just want to say hello and welcome to tonight's program. This is the final virtual program for the 2021 Paper Planes Literary Festival, and I want to thank our partners, Paper Planes, the Raven Bookstore, Lawrence Public Library, Friends and Foundation, and Independence Inc. for making this program possible. Festival director Danny Kane will be on after the program to talk about Paper Planes 2022, which we're all crossing our fingers will be in person with a full slate of amazing authors and bookish events for everyone to enjoy. I've just thrown up those links in the chat where you can buy Rebekah's book at the Raven, you can donate to Paper Planes Literary Festival, and of course, get the Paper Planes t-shirt, which I've got one here. It's a pink t-shirt with a rainbow and Paper Planes in clouds over the rainbow. And then it says, "I was there" in quotations with a mask emoji face. So be sure and get those if they interest you. So just for the menu tonight, we are recording this, and when it will be up on our library YouTube page by tomorrow afternoon. And we'll have a reading, a discussion, and a Q&A tonight. So if you want to ask a question, please use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. It's got little conversation bubbles on it. And we'll go ahead, I'll introduce our guests. Amy Bollinger is a Midwest Kansas farm girl who came to Lawrence in the 1980s to get a degree in journalism and marketing at KU. She's been married to her husband and best friend for over 30 years and has 4 children, 2 children-in-law, and 3 grandchildren. She and her husband also spent several years caring for foster children. She's worked in marketing and publications, management, and human services before starting her own business in interiors and antiques. She's been at Independence Inc. for 4 years as community engagement manager, where she also manages their accessible housing program and works directly with consumers through Independent Inc.'s core services. And then Hannah Soyer is a queer disabled writer, an MFA candidate in creative writing at the University of Kansas. She is the founder of This Body is Worthy, a project aimed at celebrating bodies outside of mainstream societal ideals, and Words of Reclamation, a space for disabled writers. And then Rebekah Taussig is a Kansas City writer and teacher, and with her doctorate in creative nonfiction and disability studies. She has led workshops and presentations at the University of Michigan, University of Kansas, and Davidson College on disability representation, identity, and community. She is also the recipient of the Hefner Heights Kansas Book Award in literary nonfiction for Sitting Pretty. The award is sponsored by the Center for Kansas Studies, the Thomas Fox Averill Kansas Studies Collection at Mabee Library, and the Friends of Mabee Library. Sitting Pretty, big news, Sitting Pretty will be developed for television by ABC Signature and studio-based Mandeville Films and director-producer Randall Einhorn's Sad Unicorn banner. You can find her on Instagram at Sitting Pretty. And I will throw those links up to the websites in the chat. And now I will hand things off to Hannah, who will be reading an excerpt from Sitting Pretty.
Thank you so much, Kristen. It's such an honor to be here with everyone. And that is really, really exciting, Rebekah. Wow. Wow. Okay. So I am going to read a section from Rebekah's Sitting Pretty. And I am going to be reading from the chapter Feminist Pool Party. Before I do that, I'm going to give a brief visual description of myself. I'm a white woman with a bit past my shoulder length, light brown hair. I'm wearing a gray sweatshirt with a blue t-shirt underneath and blue earrings. And my pronouns are she, hers. Okay, so in the middle of writing this chapter and wrestling with the intersection of disability, womanhood, and feminism, I have dinner with two of my favorite women. Alyssa and Marin walked with me and Micah to that march in 2017. And last year they officiated at our wedding ceremony, beautifully, in the most classy ass jumpsuits. On this particular summer night, we sit around the table eating gooey nachos. We talk about Einstein's brain and the hive minds of Navy SEALs. And after the second round of margaritas, Alyssa says, "How's the writing going?" I immediately drop my forehead to the table and groan. "It's fine." "Oh, okay, not the right question," she laughs. I'm trying to come up with something worthwhile to say about being a disabled woman in feminism, and I have nothing. I mean, blah, who cares? They laugh, which is what I want, but they also don't agree, which surprises me. And to make things very meta, I find myself surprised by my surprise. Did I really expect them to confirm that disabled women don't have a place in feminism? Maybe a deep, dark part of me did. I'm just not interested in writing a chapter that says hashtag do better feminism, I say. Okay, but think about this. Think how important it is for white feminism to be dismantled, Marin says. Feminism is better when it's challenged to be more inclusive. It's easy to agree with her. A feminism that considers the injuries and oppressions of only white women ultimately punishes women as it continues to participate in racism. I can also see that when feminism equates womanhood with vaginas, it continues to fuel the harms of transphobia. When feminism expands its understanding of what it means to be a woman, it's made stronger, better, and richer. But disability, I mean, feminism is already concerned with so many intersectionalities, I counter. I picture all the signs at the Women's March, signs with slogans representing every political identity and social issue, and try to imagine feminism attempting to squeeze in one more identity, one more set of concerns, one more hashtag onto the protest signs. I continue talking, but I keep my eyes clamped closed as I confess. I feel stupid raising my hand and saying, "Could you include me too, please?" I make my voice small and pathetic and pretend to raise my hand like I'm a tiny, timid mouse person. But mid-performance, eyes closed, I see my younger self hanging onto the edge of the pool while the girls splash each other in the center. I see the little person who'd rather pretend she's asleep than try to have a conversation about boys with the prettiest girls and the cutest jammies. This feeling, the one that's begging me to shut up, stay quiet, disappear, withdraw, retreat, has its roots tangled deep in me. It's the coping mechanism that says not getting an invitation is actually better. Because once you're invited, people can see you. And that means a minefield of triggers and risks. Better to just stay out of it, to find your own pocket of peace, to party solo. It's like Marin senses it. But you're not asking to be included on behalf of just yourself, she says, right? You've been given this platform to speak on behalf of so many people. This isn't just about you. And in that tiny moment, I can see all of us growing up across the planet, trying to figure out the world around us with these bodies of ours that don't quite fit. I see us as little kids getting overwhelmed at birthday parties, at the dinner table with families that don't quite get it, flipping through magazines on our beds, scouring the pages for even one picture that looks a little like us, going to our first school dances and dancing alone in our rooms, making cautious dreams and staying up late at night, trying to solve the impossible puzzle of independence, recklessly navigating our first experiences with love and sex and friendship because we haven't been given one goddamn roadmap. Suddenly, I do see it. I'm not raising my hand for me. There's a big, beautiful population of folks who deserve to be included too. And raising my hand for us feels different. Suddenly, I feel validation and urgency behind this conversation. But again, I stop short. I may be disabled, but I'm also an educated, white, straight, cis woman who grew up in a middle-class household with way too much education for my own good, and at least for now, a full-time job with health benefits. To top off this privileged, I'm so sorry, I lost my place. To top off this privileged castle in the sky, even if I were to lose my job and home, I have family who would catch me. Of all the disabled folks living in this country, in the world, I have a relatively cushy gig. I'm swimming in privileges I can't even fathom. I'm not sure, I hesitate. I'm like the one tiny person. What do I even know? What can I say about disability? You're not trying to be, quote, the voice of disability, Alyssa says, placing heavy air quotes around this make-believe title. Right, of course, there's no such thing. No universal experience of disability, I say, sounding a bit too condescending for a conversation where I'm actually the one flailing. Right, Alyssa says, but you have a voice and you've been handed this microphone. What do you know? What can you point to? Who can you bring with you? And I'm going to stop there. That gave me chills reading that aloud. So yes, thank you, Rebekah. I am now going to pass it off to you.
Hannah, I did not expect to feel so emotional listening to you read that. It's words that I already know, but listening to you read it, like I was definitely tearing up. So, well, thank you. What a special moment for me to get to hear you read those words. I'm Rebekah. I am a white woman with short brownish hair and bangs and hair pinned behind my ears, and I'm wearing a brown sweater with a white t-shirt with a red collar and some red text on it. And I'm in a room with a wall of books to my left and an orange couch behind me with some floral curtains behind my head, and I use she, hers pronouns. And I have the privilege of reading the poem that Hannah wrote in response to that section from my book. The poem is titled Roadmap. Here then, a roadmap. Find the people who can hold your own particular flavor of grief because they have drank from that well before. Sometimes you can recognize them in the way their beautifully crumpled bodies mirror yours. Sometimes you can't. Believe your crypt siblings when they tell you that you belong around this turn, down this path, through this door. Learn to read the signs written by your body on being packed into a room of people standing above you. Numbness, a cottony chill. On realizing you can't get into your own town's only gay bar because it is up a flight of stairs. Exhaustion, dripping. On heartbreak, a spiraling of nausea, a wish to curl up in a body that does not curl. When you come across these signs, it's okay to follow them. It's okay to leave. Give yourself grace on your journey. You're carving out new worlds for your people, and you were robbed of instructions.
Thank you, Rebekah.
I get goosebumps every single time I read that poem, Hannah. So what a special thing to get to, ways for our work to get to hold on to each other. We're going to welcome Amy into our conversation now. I'm so happy to have Amy joining us for the rest of our time together.
Thank you. Hi, I'm a white woman with glasses and past my shoulder length wavy hair. I'm sitting in my office, so a kind of a typical office setting with a dark blue wall and a white wall and a globe in the background and a cute little pillow with some birds on it. So it's kind of my happy place. I'm so grateful to be here with you. I love listening to both of you read those excerpts and to read the poem, Hannah. I'm going to jump in with a couple of questions. So that's kind of my part in this. And I loved processing through this book. I love processing through your poem, Hannah. And I don't know if the audience picked up on it, but kind of that connecting point was this idea of a roadmap. And I want to focus in first, Rebekah, on your book. You talked a lot in your book right from the beginning in chapter 1 about these early days in your childhood. And it was kind of some of the pictures that I got was just this kind of magical, carefree, beautiful space that you'd created for yourself, not only within your family, but really in the world around you. And you talked about you had not yet pieced together that you didn't fit. And that kind of, I imagine, led to this just real freedom to explore and to be yourself. And later in the book, you said you really hadn't even thought it necessary to enter disability into your factoring into your identity. So that's kind of a stark contrast as you work through the book, and you then talk about kind of these other things that, like Hannah just read out of one of the chapters out of your book. And so I think my jumping off question here is kind of reflecting back on those early days when I think it's probably fair to say you didn't need a roadmap or didn't even understand the need for one. But clearly that changed. When you talk about you didn't have this roadmap when you really needed it. So I'd like to kind of explore that shift between this carefree life where you hadn't factored in your disability really in your day-to-day life, and then growing into these experiences where you realized your body doesn't fit into this world, and how that kind of need for this roadmap, and when that changed, when you kind of discovered that for the first time.
Yes, I think that's a really good question. And I wish that there was just like one moment that we could point to and say, aha, that's when it happened. But I think really it was like 100, 1,000 tiny little moments that caught me off guard, where I was thinking I was living life one way, and then kind of the people around me, the context around me sort of gave me this jolt of recognition. And I realized that the way that I saw myself and the way I saw myself in the world didn't match the way people saw me. I think I started to notice the way that children and adults responded to me. I think like adults seemed to have like a particular eye on me, attention to me. I think about like when I was in preschool. I think I was in preschool. I decided I wanted to climb to the top of this. I don't even know what it's called on a playground. It's like a dome shape, and it's almost like monkey bars, but a dome shape, whatever that is called. And I was like, I'm going to climb to the top of this thing because that's what I want to do for recess. And I remember my teacher was like aghast. She was just like horrified. Somehow like I convinced her to let me do it. And then she got very teary-eyed about that, which was strange to me because I didn't think that she didn't get teary-eyed with other children at recess. Or like I remember I ran for like a student council position in elementary school, and by that point I had started to sort of piece together that that adults had this sort of bizarre reaction to me. And so I wrote into my speech something really inspirational about how I'd been through so many hard things in my life, and it would make me a good leader for this like elementary school student council position. And I didn't really know what I meant by that, but I knew that it would like get people to respond. And it did. I think that there were like actual tears in the eyes of the adults in the room. So I started to notice that there was something weird with the way that people responded to me, and with children too, but in a very different way. I think if I could point to something, I started a new school when I was in second grade, halfway through the year. And the children that I had been used to going to school with had kind of grown up with me. So there was a lot of familiarity and comfort with that group of kids. And then I started at this new school, and those kids did not know how to interact with me, and there was this very strange, they didn't even know how to talk to me really. They were friendly, but sort of like in a I can't wait to like get my time with the class pet sort of thing, like taking turns like pushing me to recess, which is not something I needed, but it seemed exciting for them. So I was like, sure, I'll make a list and put you on the list of when you can take me to recess, which is just an odd position to be in. So I guess I took a lot of cues from like the way that people interacted with me. I think also I can't underestimate the way that the stories I was consuming were signaling to me where I fit in this whole real life story. I wrote about this in the book, but like I spent a probably inappropriate amount of time watching my grandmother's taped soap operas. And so there's all kinds of messages, that I was factoring in with my little child brain about who is desirable and who is the center and star of a story, and what that person looks like, and what love looks like, and what viewers are, I don't know, like what stories are worth telling, I guess. And that was like one way I was receiving stories, but we're like saturated in stories as people. So I took a lot of cues from the stories that I was reading, and a lot of who wasn't included, or if disability was included, it was in sort of this like very unfamiliar, weird, here to prop up the main star's story sort of way. So I think I think it was a slow, tedious sort of start and stops catching myself until I started to learn that lesson and piece where I fit or didn't fit in the world. But Hannah, I'm really curious about how that, if there was anything similar for you, or if it was a different experience, like what that was like for you.
Yeah, well, I was really struck by what you just said about how we're saturated in stories and how we all are growing up, and that, well, not just growing up, but I mean, that's how life and how our culture and how society is. And I think for me, I really think a lot of the shift happened when I started to perceive myself. Actually, let me rephrase that. When I started to perceive how others were perceiving me. And so, sort of similar to what you said, Rebekah, and what you talk about in your book, I grew up where I was aware of my difference and my visible physical difference. And then I think, and I've written about this, which is why I have this concrete image. But there was a time when I was in 7th grade, I believe, where I was taking a wheelchair dance class. And my best friend at that time and I were doing a duet together. And, dance studios have floor length, huge mirrors. And there's a very specific moment where I looked at myself in the mirror and I was like, something is like, this is not what I had imagined myself to look like, And it wasn't like, oh, this isn't what my face looks like. It was like, this is what I'm seeing in the mirror is very different from how I had seen in my mind what my body looked like. And from there, I think then I began to perceive myself more in how others perceived me. And I think that it wasn't really until I went away to college that I think it was around that age when I really started to delve into the disability community more. I was able to be in a Facebook group for adults with neuromuscular diseases, which was incredibly life-changing for me because suddenly I was given perspectives on disability that were different from the perspectives that I was perceiving of myself, if that makes sense. It's a very interesting thing, you know, because I grew up having a perception of myself that was not impacted by the perception of others. And then there came a time where that perception was fed by how I saw other people perceiving me. So yes, I hope that that was a clear answer.
Hannah, it kind of reminds me, your description of that moment in with the mirror is so vivid, and I feel like it resonates with me really strongly. My equivalent to that moment is I went on a trip to like Lake Michigan, I think it was, and I had this beautiful day by the water, and I sort of like had a picture in my head of what it looked like, and it was very like, I pictured it like sort of like a Calvin Klein ad, like just like really gorgeous and gritty, and I had like this black one piece on that I thought was just like, I just thought it was like this classic gorgeous moment that I could picture like an ad, which is a weird thing for a brain to do. But then I saw a video of it like a month later, and it didn't look anything like what I'd pictured in my mind. And I wonder for both of us if how much of that, and there's no way to know this for sure, but I wonder how much of that experience had to do with the stories that we've seen over and over and over again of what beauty looks like.
Oh,
or
absolutely.
right, like
Yeah.
you talked about being saturated in stories, like it has so much of it feels like it has to do with this picture of what a beautiful moment is.
Yeah.
And then when we don't look like that picture of beauty, then there's this like weird dissonance. But that's the same for you, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, you know, when I was in undergrad, I studied journalism, and something that always, you know, really fascinated me and has continued to fascinate me and really drive a lot of my creative work as well. And we all know this is how much media shapes our perception of reality, and specifically of diverse individuals, or that's not the right term, but communities that we are perhaps not as exposed to, and how then media exposure can shape our understanding of that. And so I think that of course, you know, we know that media coverage of various groups of people who look or act or what have you differently than us, we know that shapes our perception of those people. But I think what is also really important to remember is that those media perceptions also shape our own self-perceptions of ourselves if we are a part of that community.
So that's, I could listen to you two all day talk about this. I love the pictures that you paint. So Hannah, you brought up creativity, and one of the things that I had thought about as I was reading and listening to you all is how did creativity play a part in this kind of self-designing of a roadmap? Creative thinking, creative maneuvering, just creative writing. How did creativity, or did creativity play a role in this? Sometimes it's hard to think of creativity being a part of necessity, but I would imagine you pulled a lot from that. And I also want to know how much of this process, this kind of discovering this need for a roadmap, and then the process, which is probably just forever ongoing, how much was that a beautiful and kind of empowering and growth experience versus kind of this frustrating kind of hard to accept, that you had to do this, or was it a mix of both? So I'll leave it at that.
So I think that, yeah, I love this question about creativity. It reminds me of the term crypt magic, which is a term that I first heard from disability writer and scholar Petra Kuppers. I'm not sure if it is her term specifically or if it comes from somewhere else, but that is where I first heard of it. And it really is in reference to the many skills that disabled individuals acquire because of, I guess, the fact that there is no roadmap. And so then, in many ways, we have to work to figure out our own roadmap. And of course, that is very different for every disability. And even within the same disability, everyone's roadmap is going to look a bit different. So I think of it like that. I also think, Amy, when you were speaking, I was thinking of something that the writer Glennon Doyle talks about in her book Untamed, and how she asks people who come to her with various issues, problems, barriers that they're facing. She always asks them to imagine what the truest and most authentic and beautiful version of their life would be. And that it's in that imagining of what that could be, which is, of course, creativity, right? Then that is where the change occurs. So I think that's a part of it too, in that, for example, so I'm finishing up my final year at KU in grad school, and then I am doing a fellowship this summer through KU, and then I will probably be moving back to Iowa. Most of my funding services for my personal care attendants are funded by an organization that will no longer fund me once I'm fully employed. So that is a terrifying and horrible thing that I'm coming face to face with. But, and I also want to be careful in how I phrase this, because this is not at all a narrative of me telling you to just persevere and that there's an answer out there. That's not what this is. This is me saying that really, due to, the various crypt magic that I have found in my life and that I've found for my community and the other people in my life who are familiar with my disability, once me and my family, once we were able to imagine other possibilities of making, this next chapter in my life work, then things start to shift a bit and the creativity starts to come up with various solutions for that. Yeah, so that was, I guess, a more of an answer to the creativity question. I don't know, Rebekah, do you have specific thoughts on that as well?
First of all, Hannah, I feel like I had my own version of that terrifying transition from being a very poor grad student into trying to leap into employment and full-time working in a way that allowed me to actually hold on to the support that I needed. I just am feeling that stress in my body as you're talking about that. Even as I'm so aware of and grateful for the power of crypt magic and all that can do too. When I think about creativity in this conversation, the relationship between creativity and disability for me is really woven together really, really tightly. I think in multiple directions, creativity has helped me figure out my life as a disabled person in a way, but also I think disability has fostered a lot of creativity in me. I really like taking personality tests a lot. Like I don't know, like even the silly ones that tell you like what Harry Potter character you are. But I usually, when I take personality tests, I usually get some form of like, you're an explorer, and you like to like travel the world, and maybe I would, but I think inaccessibility of a lot of the world has made me kind of actually geographically stay pretty close to home. But I feel like writing, and as a writer and a creative writer, I feel like I've channeled whatever energy that is. Like writing has been this space of exploration for me, and has allowed me to like, I don't know, it's kind of sound cheesy, but like travel intellectually, so that my brain is sort of this space to think through ideas. And a lot of my writing is usually me wanting to explore something that's unexplored. And so I think that relationship is an interesting one to me. I think it also, writing has been this source of connection. Hannah talked about connecting with community. I did that a little bit later in my life, like in my mid to late 20s was the first time I actually started to connect with a disability community and feel some of that magic that Hannah described. But that was only because of this creative energy to write and understand that connection, and that I found that community and was sort of able to connect with people. So I find that energy has sort of led to this billowing of fueling more creativity, fueling more connections, but also in this very practical sense. Like I'm a mom now, and we were even talking a little bit before we hopped on this call about how my son has just started walking, and which is just this whole new set of, I don't know, it sounds so negative, but problems, right? Like, how are we going to manage life now that my toddler is like running across the house? And I feel like in all the stages of motherhood so far, and let's be honest, there's not been many. He's only 11 months old, so I've been a mom for one hot minute. But in my experience of motherhood so far, I feel like the skills I've developed of like creative problem solving as a disabled person, I'm leaning so heavily on that muscle of adaptability and flexibility, and how are we going to get from here to there now, and how are we going to adapt this space to work for our unique needs, and maybe we would call that a little bit of crypt magic. I'm not sure if that qualifies, but yeah, I feel like that creativity and the energy that comes from that, and the connections, and what that brings into my life, and how disability fuels my creativity is just sort of the I don't know, is it too dramatic to say that's sort of like a life force around me that's kind of constantly feeding each other, and I know has bolstered me over the long haul. So I think that's such a good question. There's, maybe Hannah and I could like write a book about it, co-author a book about how, I mean, there's just so much to say about that, right? But it's such a good question. Thank you for that, Amy.
I think we're getting fairly close to time. So I kind of just want to hear what you all think. It kind of goes back to the second part of the question of what's the process been like? But I kind of want to pose it from like a hindsight. And of course, this will probably, your answer would probably evolve 10 years from now, might be different than it is now. But kind of what's the beauty in having to have created your own roadmap? Or is there, talk about what you doing that, each of you, that experience of going against what, you talked about the teacher who you're trying to climb the jungle gym, is what we always called it. And in that sense, she had an impact that could have created a roadmap for you. So what was it like going against what society was saying, this is what your roadmap should be, or these are my expectations of you, And what was that process like? It kind of internally, where was the beauty in it? Where was the heart in it? I know you've touched a little bit on that, but I kind of wanted to explore that a little bit more.
Hannah, do you want to jump in first, or I can? I don't know what makes more sense.
It makes no difference to me.
Okay. All right. I'll just start because I unmuted myself. Yeah, I think that it has been both hard and beautiful, as so many things are. I think for me, not having a roadmap and kind of I started to realize that I didn't have a roadmap and some of these big mile markers, like finding it when all of my peers were like starting to find jobs, or when everyone started dating, or, like some of these big mile markers. And I think not having a roadmap for me led to a lot of pretty massive, I wanted to call them blunders or missteps. Ultimately, I think in the big picture, I'm really grateful for them. But at the like messiness, right? Like it was just a lot of messiness in my life. And I write, like, for example, I think a big obvious example in my book is I got married really young, and I had a big painful messy divorce from that. And I think what I was trying to do in that early marriage was follow what felt like the roadmap, and Hannah talked about like consuming all of these stories and sort of piecing together what a roadmap should look like and trying to kind of force myself into that roadmap. I mean, even thinking about, I like cringe thinking about all of the choices that I made, and even like my wedding in my first marriage, like, a bride is supposed to have like this big poofy dress, which makes no sense for a wheelchair. Like this is like the worst idea ever. But like in my mind, this is the roadmap to like what a wedding is supposed to look like. Such a small example, but I think it's so tangible. And a bride is supposed to walk down the aisle. And so I really pushed myself and potentially maybe did harm to my body, and in really pushing myself to be able to walk down the aisle holding on to both of my parents' arms, because that's what this should look like. And so it made like a lot of small and big missteps in trying to follow this default map. But I think also for me, that combination of following the wrong map led to sort of like this little early 20s implosion of my life, and kind of forced me to start again and rebuild the map. And I think I'm really grateful for that. I'm so grateful that the default map didn't work for me, because I really like this map that I've been able to sort of hobble together on my own, but I think also with this community, and kind of being able to gather some signposts from this community. And I think just like a point of contrast to that default roadmap is just the ceremony that my partner and Micah and I had a few years ago. No poofy dresses, no aisles, no, not very many people. It was just an entirely different experience. And I see those two events as sort of evidence of being able to follow my own roadmap, and it's so much better that way. I would prefer that and choose that 100 times over. I think since becoming a mother, I'm having to remind myself that I don't need to or shouldn't and can't follow a default roadmap for motherhood. I'm having to kind of relearn some of those lessons, and I'm finding my instincts saying like, oh, but a mother's supposed to do this, a mother's supposed to look like that. And it's really painful to have to relearn those lessons and realize like, no, we're writing our own map. Isn't that cool? Isn't that exciting? Isn't that empowering? But it's as long as I've been kind of in the position to be following a different map, it can still be difficult. I'm finding for me. But Hannah, I want to know how this is for you.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that, I think it's hard. The process of building and creating a roadmap is hard because you either do it or you don't survive. I think if you are someone that is in an oppressed and marginalized community, and this doesn't, of course, just go for disability, this goes for any marginalized or oppressed community, especially people at intersecting identities. I think if you don't have those instructions, if you don't have that roadmap, you don't really survive. And so I think that in many ways it's not necessarily a choice in creating and building your own roadmap. But the flip side of that is that it is, of course, beautiful, because then that roadmap that you create can become a blueprint for others' roadmaps who come after you, or who are in the same community as you. And I think that's like the wonderful and magical thing about community and about the disability community and of any marginalized community. And I think it's also, I was thinking about this also as you were speaking, Rebekah, is it's not, at least for me, it's like my roadmap is not something that, I pulled from thin air. I think that it is something that is of course continually impacted by the fellow disabled writers, artists, individuals who I know and who I'm close to, and also who came before me, and so I think that in that way, it's this beautiful lineage of stories that are continuing to be told. But yeah, I think it's sort of two sides of the same coin, for sure.
All right, I think, are we ready for questions? We've got there's a few really lovely things that aren't questions, but Richard says, congrats, Rebekah, for your book, and congrats, Hannah, on your poem. And then Jean Ramsey says, Rebekah, do you remember 4th grade? I am Pat Ramsey, your 4th grade teacher. Wow, Rebekah, you have done so well in your life. I am so proud of all you have accomplished.
4th grade was my favorite grade of all school, I think. Not even exaggerating. This is so exciting to me. Mrs. Ramsey, I remember everything about 4th grade, including MRWRs, and reading James and the Giant Peach. Anyway, that's really fun.
All right, so this one is for both Rebekah and Hannah. What kinds of stories are you most excited to tell in your future work?
Okay, I can go first. Yeah, so I am finishing up my thesis, and I'm actually in the process of querying agents right now. And my book, so exciting to say that, is really a collection of experimental lyric essays exploring disability, queerness, trauma, and really the question of who gets to be considered human and who doesn't get to be considered human. So I'm really excited about that. I think that those themes are going to continue to impact my work in the future. Something though that I really want to spend more time on and really want to get into working on is some sort of collection of speculative fiction stories, short stories that deal with disability and queerness, perhaps. Yeah. Rebekah, over to you.
I'm so excited about your book as well. And I can't wait to read it. And also this, I didn't know you were interested in like a collection of speculative fiction. That's really exciting too. Yes, for me, so a couple of things. Kristen mentioned that Sitting Pretty has been optioned to be turned into a TV show, and I'm lucky enough to be able to write for as far as we go down that road. So that's a new genre of writing for me. I had like the smallest bit of experience in one screenwriting class in graduate school. So I'm kind of diving headfirst into that world. And one of the things I think is really exciting about that space is that it's relying entirely on showing. And Sitting Pretty is so much telling. It's Sitting Pretty as a book, as there's story throughout the whole thing, but there's a lot of ideas that are being presented and explained. And I really am excited about leaning into the story and the world and the feeling of living in a body like mine, similar to mine, a disabled body, a wheelchair user. And you know, as Hannah and I were talking about so much today or tonight about just the power, the impact of visual storytelling, I'm really excited to be able to participate in that. It's really new and like you can tell from my face, I'm jazzed about it. And then I am also, you know, I talked about how with writing, so much of my drive is seeking to understand and explore new ideas. And something that's really new for me right now is being a mom. There's so much for me to try to wrestle with and understand and piece together there, that I am finding myself drawn to write about that a lot as well. Yeah, there's been a lot of things in the last year that our little family has lived through. My partner, Micah, had cancer and is recovering from treatment from that. And of course, we've been experiencing babyhood and cancer in a pandemic, which all of us have felt the impact of in one way or another. Yeah, I've got to, what do I make of all of that? I'm not sure. And writing is sort of the space that I go to for that. So yeah, there's lots of stuff to continue to write about, right? So those are a couple of things for me.
Fantastic. And congratulations, Hannah. That's awesome. Let's see. So another attendee asks, would love to hear about your personal aesthetics and how those preferences are influenced, if at all, by your personal experience of disability. For example, Hannah, as a queer person, do you make any distinct choices to express that part of your identity?
Yes. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, is I guess how those two identities intersect for me, and if I consciously choose to write about both of them. And yes, I most certainly do. I think that actually it's funny because I first got sort of my taste of sort of queer theory when I was in undergrad. And this was before I had really come to terms with my own sexuality. But something really resonated with me because queer theory, a lot of queer theory is really about turning hierarchical structures on their head and looking at things from a different perspective. And that really resonated with me as a disabled person. So even before I was identifying as queer, there was something about that way of life and way of looking at things that really connected to me as a disabled person. So that being said, I do see them as very connected identities, and my work, my thesis, which I just finished and I'm working on turning into a book, is very much about disability and trauma, and then also queer love. And Rebekah mentioned the pandemic. Yeah, let's just take a moment to recognize the great magnitude that has in fact impacted our past lives. Yeah. which that's not related to queerness at all, but you know.
Kristen, I might have missed it. I love Hannah's answer for that. Was there something for me to answer in that question?
I think in particular, they, used Hannah's example as a queer person, but the first part is they would love to hear about your personal aesthetics and how those preferences are influenced by your personal experience of disability.
Aesthetics, like when I think of the word aesthetics, I'm thinking like clothing and like, am I like off the mark there? I might not be understanding the question correctly.
Could it maybe be like writing aesthetics, writing style?
Writing style.
Let's see if they have another clarification. It's an
So I guess when I think of that, I also think of like, as a queer woman, like one of the books I was first drawn to was The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson. And that style of writing has certainly impacted how I write.
In what way, Hannah? How do you feel like Maggie Nelson's writing like found its way to your writing?
Because I think Maggie Nelson writes prose poetry. I think that her prose nonfiction books are really just poetry without line breaks. And I think that is largely the style of writing that I work in. And I think that how she writes, especially in the Argonauts, things are very loosely threaded, interconnected together. So you have to sort of work to connect the dots. But yeah.
Well, okay, so when I think about writers that have influenced, I feel like have influenced my style of writing, the two people that come to mind first is Andrew Solomon and Alison Kafer. I think both of those writers, what I admire about both of those writers and what I would try to emulate in my work would be never sitting too long in any one position, right? So as soon as we look at the idea with one slant, let's turn it, and there's a whole new slant in which to examine that same thing. Like we're constantly turning and looking and turning and looking. That I don't feel like I'm ever totally settled. There's always a slightly different way to pull at the thing. And I feel like Alison Kafer and Andrew Solomon do that work so gracefully and in a way that is you're looking at something in a really complicated way, but it's actually so clear the way that they guide you through that. I really admire that. And I suppose that there's a way that my experience in the world maybe mirrors that. Maybe that's why I'm drawn to it. I'm not sure, but Andrew Solomon and Alison Kafer are both writing about disability from slightly different vantage points. But I would recommend reading them. It's worth your time.
Let's see here. All right. So we have one question about what Richard is interested about your writing practices. Just what your process is. Do you write at the same time every day? Any sort of writing habits? They're curious about that.
Hannah, what are your writing habits?
Yes, I would love to talk about that very briefly. So one, I don't sit down and write at the same time every day. I'm not really a fan of that idea that writers have to sit down at their computer or notebook and write at the exact same time every day for the exact same amount of time. I don't think that is conducive to all of our wonderful, diverse humans on this planet. And I have found that once I have been able to become aware of when I have something to write, and then I make sure that I write it down, then I've become better and better at recognizing when that urge is there, and then making sure that I prioritize that in my day. So, for example, yesterday I was eating lunch and suddenly something just came to me about the table that I was eating lunch on, which I then texted my mom and I was like, hey, where did this table come from? You know, and so that then turned into something which I assume in a few weeks will turn into an essay, you know? And so if I would have just ignored that urging, then I wouldn't have gotten down that idea, which would then have turned into something else. At the same time, if I would have sat down in the morning yesterday and been like, oh, okay, I've written for an hour, I'm done, then, you know, the same magic wouldn't have come from that.
To be honest, I wish that I had a writing ritual. I wish that I was like the person who is it? Was it Glennon Doyle who wrote like who her first book happened because she like started getting up at 4 a.m. and like went into a closet and wrote every morning or something. I don't know. I will never be that person. Before Otto was born, my son, I was like always scrambling to write to meet a deadline. And like writing, like fitting writing into the corners of moments of days when I could scramble to find some time. I wrote sitting pretty while I was teaching high school, like between grading papers and writing lesson plans while I was falling asleep in bed. Like I wish that there was some ritual or routine, but I've not found that. And now that I have a son, it's like, I don't know, I'm writing in my phone while I'm falling asleep. I'm, you know, sending a text message of an idea, like Hannah mentioned. I feel like I'm kind of always trying to reach for the moments when I can find them. And that's the truth of it. I wish that there was something that felt like more writerly to say about that. Like, I don't know. That is I am a writer, so that's my answer as a writer. I'm always just kind of, I feel like I do a lot of writing in my brain, actually. Like I'm thinking through ideas while I'm doing dishes, while I'm supposed to be falling asleep, while I'm getting up for a 4 a.m. feeding, whatever that might be. And then a lot of times when I do have those moments, I'm ready to just put a lot of things down. And but yes, there's a lot of writing up to the deadline in this house.
All right, and we've got a lot of questions, so I might like condense and like couple some. So there's one, can you talk a little bit about language use, like reclaiming the term crip, for instance?
That's a very important and timely and relevant question. Hannah, do you want to talk specifically about reclaiming the word crip?
Sure. Well, you know, I think that for me, my perspective and perception on reclaiming the word crip is really rooted in specific disability justice circles and looking at things through disability justice, which is a movement that was largely founded by Black and Brown queer disabled femmes. So to me, using the word crip is something that I don't know. I mean, I don't really use it a lot. I don't use it around my friends who don't identify as disabled. But I would say crip magic, which I think is what I mentioned earlier. And I'm guessing where this question, what sparks this question, that to me is very specific. It doesn't feel the same as just disability magic, right? Like I think it's really something about what we do in order to survive, which is really a beautiful thing. So
yeah, I think language is such an interesting question because on the surface it feels like so simple, and I think often people look or ask questions about language because they want to like get it right. Like, what is the term I'm supposed to use? What's the right term to use? There, like, language is so complicated. It's so personal. It's attached to so much history. It reflects so much. Like, there's so much underneath it. The words that we choose represent so much more. And I find the more like, since the books come out, especially anytime that there's a Q&A, a lot of people ask about language, and what terms we should or shouldn't use. And I use the word like disabled mother, disabled parent, disabled woman a lot, as opposed to woman with a disability or parent with a disability. And that's the question I get a lot is, isn't it person first language? And even, identity first language doesn't feel new to me. Saying disabled woman doesn't feel new to me, but it's still a very contentious debate. I think even just recently there was something that happened on Instagram, on the internet, where a disabled person used identity first language, and the comment section was just vicious against this person, saying that's not correct. You're not supposed to use you're supposed to use person first language. And so I don't know. I think it's interesting that these debates, there are so many debates about language where people feel really confident about the correct language to use. And to me, I feel like when it comes to disability specifically, there are a lot of implications that come with the words you choose. But so if there's a disabled person in the room, I would always defer to what that person prefers. For me, identity first language is preferable because disability is a part of me. It's not something I feel like I need to distance from myself. Person with a disability makes it seem like there's this version of me, and then disability is like this apparatus that I carry around. And my experience of disability is that it is twined into who I am as myself. And I feel like a lot of people in the disability community express similar things. There's a movement called Say the Word, which emphasizes to not be afraid to use the word disability or disabled, that isn't necessarily a bad thing that you're attaching to a person, that a lot of times our dancing around the term disabled is more evidence of our discomfort with disability than it is a kindness. But I am speaking as a person who's been disabled as long as I've been making memories. So my disability is something that I feel intimate and that is close to me. I can imagine that there are people who become disabled later in life who prefer person first language, or depending on what your disability is, I think there are people who prefer that. So I guess I just find it interesting when we sort of insist on what the right way to refer to a person with disabilities or disabled person is, when that means different things to different people. I think it is important to understand what's being implied and what the legacy is behind the words that we use. I find a lot of euphemisms around disability to be pretty intolerable, handicapable, or I don't know, Hannah, you might remember more of the strange roundabout ways that people use language to avoid actually just saying disability or disabled person. But it's a good question. I think it is important. I think it's more interesting than a lot of people give it credit for, because what I hear from people a lot is like, what are the right terms? And I don't think that's exactly how it works with language all the time. And particularly with these terms we've talked about tonight, it seems like there's a lot of personal relationship to those terms. Crip is one I find myself drawn to a lot. I think one of the first hashtags I started using on Instagram was cripple punk. And there was just sort of this like defiance in holding on to that term and using it for myself that felt right at the time. But yeah, it's a good question. It's an interesting question.
So I think in the interest of time, we'll do one more, and I apologize to everyone who I haven't gotten to your questions. But Dot asks, how about your political awakening? When did you both become aware of disability as a political issue and one that greatly affects your lives in terms of rights as women with disabilities?
Rebecca, do you want me to go first?
Sure, you go first.
Okay, actually, can I hand it to you because my helper is coming in to plug in my computer. So give
Perfect
me one
timing.
second.
Yeah, yes, that's perfect. Yeah. I think for me, this is ongoing. I think that there are layers to pull back to this, but probably a big part of it was learning more about our history. Learning about like the Section 504 sit-in, learning about like reading Judy Heumann's book. I mean, I read Judy Heumann's book just this last year, and I feel like learning about just the battles, the hard-earned progress, learning about the Capitol crawl, like realizing that the ADA just didn't appear, you know, that there were long, hard battles to have any form of access and the rights that we have now. Which is one of the reasons why I think Crip Camp is such an exciting documentary that on Netflix right now, for everyone to get to feel that history and realize that this is a part of history. I think that I felt this with my students before when I've like introduced or talked about the Capitol crawl and described for them what this was, and how many of them said, I can't believe I didn't know that. I didn't know that that was a part of our history. I think like putting that on the map for everyone to see and witness has been really important. So that, I think for me, just learning about our history, learning more and more details about the people that have come before us and are continuing to do such hard work to even hold on to what we have, let alone make further progress. So that's been huge for me. Hannah, is this a good time to pass things along? Okay.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think that all of that most certainly. I think also for me, the more involved in the disability community I became, the more I heard stories and learned from other people who perhaps did not have the same privileges as I did, of having, you know, a family that could take care of me growing up, or who had, you know, the resources to get the care that I needed. So I think that really started the awakening. I think also when I moved away from home for the first time and went to college for undergrad, and I was suddenly managing, you know, all of my own caretakers, and dealing suddenly with having to be the boss and manager of, you know, women who were 1 to 5 years older than me. I was, you know, moving just away from home for the first time. And that was really quite, I would say, an experience that awoke me to how the healthcare system works and how the system of getting the care that disabled people need to live works, and how very, very precarious that all is. And I think that I think that that largely was what really made me start to think, oh, this is in fact a very political issue. You know, and it's not something that can be separated really from any sort of discussion of healthcare, because even when we're talking about such political issues as, you know, Medicaid for all or Medicare for all, there often is still not there's often still not a discussion within that campaign of how the caregivers for people with disabilities are going to be covered, how those hours are going to be covered. So I think it is inherently political, and I think that when, you know, you have something that you need to live, that is being threatened, I think that is an inherently political thing.
All right. Well, thank you both. And then let me spotlight Danny, who's going to tell us about paper planes. But first off, I mean, I know we can't hear applause, but I just want to thank you both so much for coming tonight. Thank you, Rebekah, Hannah, and Amy. What a fantastic program. And thank you so much for your writing and everything you're doing creatively. It's such a gift to everyone. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And now I'll hand things off to Danny.
Yes, I'll echo Kristen in thanking Amy, Rebekah, and Hannah. It was a wonderful night. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. It's so good to see you both again, and it's always a joy to hear you talk about your writing and your work. I'm Danny Kane. I am the festival director of Paper Planes Literary Festival. I am a white man with black glasses and dark hair sitting in a room with posters on the wall behind me. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight to this conclusion to the 2021 Paper Planes Literary Festival, which was all online this year with 3 keynote events. We're grateful for the huge community support and to see all of you at these events. I would also like to thank Kristen and the Lawrence Public Library for putting together this wonderful event and being a hugely valuable partner to Paper Planes for this and many other things. A quick thanks to the Paper Planes board, Giselle, Thomas, Sarah, Ann, Boog, Adib, Mercedes, Christy, Emily, and Margie. None of this would be possible without our tireless and hardworking board. The same can be said for our donors and sponsors who are, I'm fortunate to say, are too numerous to list at this point, but I encourage you to go to paperplanes.org and click on about and see everybody who has helped to make this possible. For updates on future Paper Planes plans, follow us on social media at Paper Planes Fest and keep an eye on paperplanes.org. We are a literary festival in Lawrence, Kansas, determined to provide free programming to highlight and celebrate Midwestern literary culture. We are planning a large in-person festival for April 2022. A lot of details are yet to be formed, but I will say one of our headliners is going to be the wonderful Colson Whitehead, who is slated for Paper Planes #1. He will be back. His new novel is The Harlem Shuffle, which is out in September 2021. This arc came in the mail today to my workplace at the Raven. He'll talk about that and many other things. There's so much more that we have in the works for Paper Planes 2022. So thank you for your support over our first 2 years, and we really look forward to seeing you next spring for our in-person event. And just thanks again. This was wonderful, a perfect cap to a wonderful 2021 festival. So thanks to everyone. And I will send it back to Kristen.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I miss in-person events because we all got to mingle and kind of chat, and now I just like press a big red button that says end, so it's a little sad, but so glad that like everyone could join us. And thank you again so much, Rebekah, Hannah, and Amy, for putting together such a really wonderful program. So thank you and take care, everyone.
Yes,
Thanks for
thank you.
having us.